Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Hello friends, welcome to Sandhan. I am Shabir Parmar, working as a lecturer in English at Government Polytechnic, Jamnagar. Friends, I feel pleasure to deliver a lecture through Sandhan, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom. Friends, today our topic for discussion is Goodbye Party for Miss Pushpa TS by Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel is a very important and significant figure of Indian English poetry. We all know, friends, that Ezekiel has contributed to the development of Indian English writing. Before discussing the poem, I would like to discuss about his life and works. Now, let us start with the initial, that is the writing of Nissim Ezekiel, who has created a very important scenario in the development of modern Indian English poetry. In India, we know that we started writing poetry in the 19th century, and we can see that in the beginning, the people like Henry Desrosiers, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, these people started writing poetry in the beginning of the 20th century and in the 19th century, and in their writing we can see that there is a clear influence of romantic poets, or we can say that the British English poet. To discuss about the life of Nissim Ezekiel, I remember here that Ezekiel slightly did the same thing as T.S. Eliot did into the very beginning of modern Indian English, in the beginning of British poetry. Now, looking towards Eliot's contribution, Nissim Ezekiel's same way, after a few years later, he started the same kinds of poetry, writing a poetry in Indian context. But there are few differences also. But Ezekiel has changed the scenario. He created a fashion of writing a poetry. Let us look at his life and works. Nissim Ezekiel was born in Mumbai on 16th December 1924. He belongs to Mumbai's Marathi-speaking Jewish community. He studied literature at Wilson College, where his father also used to teach. And after that, he went to the university, Mumbai University, and then you can see that he also studied philosophy in London. During her childhood days, Ezekiel has seen or felt a different kind of person, because he was a Jew and he was feeling like an alienated person, and the same thing you will find in his poetry. Ezekiel was also influenced by modernist writer or modern English poets. The theme and techniques, as we see, that they are quite different. So in a way, Ezekiel has inspired numbers of writers, particularly in the field of poetry, that they started a new movements, and you will see this kind of references in his poetic works. He is therefore regarded as the father of post independence Indian English poetry. Now, this is very important that he is called as the father of post independence Indian English poetry. If we look at in the history, we, as I told you earlier, that Desrosiers, Henry Desrosiers, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, and then Toru Dutt, these were a few poets that they initially started writing poetry. And then we have a very important figure, and the spirit change, then that was nationalism in the colonial period also. Now again you have Sri Arvind, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Rabindranath Tagore, and many other poets that they took Indian English poetry at the height. Again, after the independence, there was we can see that there is a change in society scenario and many different kinds of perspectives of writing, and the change you can also observe into the poetry also. And particularly Nissim Ezekiel has reflected the same change, you can say, into the poetic writing. Again, you have the many different points. You will see that Ezekiel has established a trend. He is called as a trend setter in modern Indian English poetry and influenced many poets of his time like P. Lal and Dom Moresh and other writers, even Kamla Das. So you see that this poetry for this new generation that belong to Ezekiel and other poets as well, you can notice that the poetry is slightly different than the poetry of Henry Desrosiers and other poets. Particularly, Ezekiel's poetry reflects the spirit of the time. Okay, whatever the changes you observe into the society, whatever the feelings you feel, that you can see in the poetry of Nissim Ezekiel. And this poem, A Goodbye Party for Miss Pushpa T.S., is one of them. You can also observe that how Ezekiel has used English language, or how he has displayed, or you can say that the represented Indian mindset, okay, for English. So that is, you will also see in this poem. Now again, as I told you, that Ezekiel's writing represents the spirit of the time. Okay, the society, the influence of Western poets, there we need a Indian vocabulary. Then we need the context, that is the words, phrases, and the depiction that we can observe, that is a Indian observation. So generally in Ezekiel's poetry there is a deep sense of Indianness. He is quietly different than other poets because his roots belongs to India. Again, you have a choice. Then you can study in the later on in his poems that he gave new breath and fresh feelings to modern Indian English verse. Okay, so I believe that he gave new breath and fresh feelings to modern Indian English verse. And for his a very important contribution, he won Sahitya Akademi Award in 1983, and later on he was honored the Padma Shri in 1988. So this is reflected in his writing, and you can see that Ezekiel has very importantly contributed in the development of modern Indian English poetry. Simple and lucid style, that is very important, that we have Mahatma Gandhi, who started using English, or you can see that his English was very simple, but he wrote in a prose generally. Now Ezekiel's writing is simple and lucid. You will feel that that is a very important quality of his writing. And again, typical Indian tone and craftsmanship are some of the remarkable features of his poetry. When you read Ezekiel's poetry, you can observe the tone, you can observe the sentence, and even very importantly, the mindset of the speaker. So Ezekiel always tries to reveal the mindset of the speaker, that is, that the speaker belongs to India and he represents Indian psychology. Again, Ezekiel's craftsmanship is very important feature. You will observe that his poems are very well crafted and they are very beautifully arranged in the context. Then, for praising his particularly Bruce King rightly says that he has written very important statement about Nazim Ezekiel, and in this statement you will observe that most of the things you can clearly find that he has captured within these few lines. He says that of all the groups of poets attempting to create a modern English poetry in India, Nazim Ezekiel soon emerged as the leader who advised others, set standards, and created places of publications. Ezekiel brought a sense of discipline, self criticism, and mastery to Indian English poetry. He was the first Indian poet to have such a professional attitude. So, Bruce King very importantly suggested, and he tried to conclude the contribution of Nazim Ezekiel. And again, very as a student of literature, we when we read poems of Nazim Ezekiel, we feel the same kinds of feelings, that he clearly said that Ezekiel was the first person who started professionalism particularly, and he recognized as a very important voice of 20th century, especially in the Indian context. In general, Ezekiel was Indian. He reflected the experiences and his minute observation of the society, and he tried to convey all these things through the medium of poetry. And that is where the Bruce King has appropriately identified his contribution, and you can also observe these things in the writing. Looking towards his famous collections of poetry, these are his famous poetic collections, and you will see that all these poems collections are very important contribution to the development of Indian English poetry. First, look at the title. 1952, he wrote "Time to Change." The time to change is very importantly. The title suggests that now the era of new time or new beginning is there in the context of Indian English poetry. So, time to change very importantly reflects the spirit of the time, and it also suggests that the time is now moving or changing, and the impact of such time you can feel in the writings of poets of these generations. Second, 1953, 60 poems he published. Then in 1960, The Unfinished Man, in 1965 the exact name, and in 1976 Hymns in Darkness. So overall you will observe that Ezekiel has completely dedicated his life to write poems. He was also a critic, means he was editor, and he also wrote drama plays. So in a way Ezekiel has not only created environment, but he gave a very specific identity to Indian English poetry. And looking towards this his famous collections of poetry, you will see that he was dedicated to write only and only poems. And then you will see that the result I have selected here few poems to be discussed. Okay, we will discuss Goodbye Party for Mistress Party, yes, in detail, but there are few important poems that we need to even understand, and these poems are very important. They are much antholized, and they are particularly effective in its theme, content, and specifically as a student of literature we should read certain poems. You will see that Night of the Scorpion is very significant poem. You will see that Ezekiel, he might be recognized as a great poet with the publication of Night of the Scorpion. This poem captures Indian image. Specifically, you will observe that Ezekiel has created an environment in his poems that the characters, people, and their belief is revealed.